Happy Monday. So, it is a new week, new chapters, new fun. So, we are on chapter 4 of Woods Runner. Um, you hopefully have already watched your social studies video and answered those questions. So we are going to jump right in, and I'm going to read the questions that you're supposed to answer. So just like last week, I recommend hopping off of this, keeping it open, obviously, but hopping off of this and opening the document where you answered your social studies questions, so that way you can answer the questions as we go along. So go ahead and do that real quick. And I'm going to read you the questions that you need to answer for today. So, question number 1: what happened to the cabin? Question number 2: how many bodies did he have to bury? And question number 3: describe how Samuel was feeling in chapter 4. Be sure to use evidence from the text that you heard to support your answer. So those are some interesting questions. So without further ado, let's go ahead and begin chapter 4. It's not too long. Samuel smelled it before he saw anything. Not just the smoke from the fires, but the thick, heavy smell. Blood. Death. No. The single word took over his brain. Part of his thinking was automatic, leading him to act with caution, move with stealth. But the front part, the thinking part, hung on one word: no. He'd made good time, running hard until his lungs seemed to be on fire, then jogging until he got his breath, then back to the full-out run. There was probably another half hour of daylight before it was too dark to see. As he approached the settlement, he slowed and moved off to the side. It would do no good to run head-on if the attackers were still there. He was silent, listening keenly. Surely if anyone was still there, they would make some noise. All Samuel heard was the crackling of fire, the soft night sounds of evening birds. No human sound. At the edge of the clearing was his home. He paused, frightened, no, terrified at what he would find. He was hidden in some branches, and he studied the area through the leaves to make sure it was clear before he stepped out. The cabin was gone. Burned to the ground, side shed and all. Here and there an ember flickered and crackled, and smoke rose into the evening sky, but the building was no more. In the distance he could see that the other cabins scattered through the clearing had been burned as well. Dreading what he might find, he forced himself to search the ashes, looking for the slightest indication of bodies. He could not bring himself to think about what he was really looking for: his parents. His brain would not allow it, though he knew the death smell came from someone. He could not allow himself to believe it was from them, from his mother and father. He found nothing in the ashes, and when he spread the search out to the cabin, moving in greater circles, he still found no trace that might have been his parents. But as the search loop widened, he began to come across bodies. His neighbors, shot and hacked where they'd fallen. They did not look like they had been people. What he found seemed more like trash, paper and cloth blown across the ground. But they were people, friends, and families he had known. A frantic need to look, the thought that the next body might be the one he dreaded to find most. And he ran from one to another, trying to identify them in the flailing light. Most had been mutilated so badly that it was hard to tell who they once had been. Overton lay by his cabin, his shirt sleeves still not down on his wrist, chest and stomach filled with arrows, his scalp so gone that his face drooped without the top skin to hold it up. Samuel ran from body to body in the gathering, twisting through the twilight until at last there were no bodies to find. No matter how fast he ran, how wide he ran, he did not find his parents, along with 6 or 7 others they had not been killed, or at least not been killed here. They had been taken away. They had not been killed. He clung to that thought. They had not been killed. He stood, his breathing ragged, sobbing softly. Twice he had thrown up, and the smell and taste mixed with the tears of frustration and grief for his friends, and rage for what had been done to them. He knew that if he lived to be 100, he would never lose the taste, the smell, or the images of what he had just seen, the madness of what men could do to other men in savage rage. Dark caught him now. He had circled through the settlement and was back in his own cabin, or where it had been. There was nothing left that would furnish light. All of the candles had melted, but he trapped some of the embers that were still glowing, and he made a campfire off from the cabin a bit. In its light, he found the woodpile, which oddly had not been burned. And at the side of the pile there was a stack of pine pitch knots and the roots that his mother had used to start fires. The pitch concentrated in the knots, burned with a smoky hot flame that lasted for an hour or more and would work as a torch. Near the garden plot, he found the oak shovel that had been used to turn the earth for gardening. The attackers had overlooked it or left it as useless because anything of value had been taken or destroyed. There were 9 bodies to be buried before the coyotes, wolves, and bear came. He knew that he would be moving come daylight, tracking, looking for sign, so the burying had to be done tonight. Carrying spare pine knots and the shovel, he went from body to body. He dug a shallow grave next to each one, knowing that it might not be enough to protect them, that scavengers might dig them up, but so pressed for time that he had no choice. He covered each as best he could. 3 were children and did not take as long, and though it was hard to tell exactly who they were in the dark and with the condition of the bodies, he remembered the children laughing and playing in front of the Olafsons' cabin, 2 boys and a little girl with a crude doll. He found the doll in the grass and wept as he buried it with the smallest body. He cried over each corpse, thinking of them meeting in the cabin and living and talking and laughing and just being. And now all gone. Gone. He could not stop crying, thinking of his parents, wondering and worrying. It took 5 hours to bury everyone. It was still dark when he finished and looked around him. And then he realized that he should have said something over the bodies. He did not know the right words. Something about ashes and dust, but he took another torch and went back to each grave and bowed his head and said, "Please, Lord, take them with you. Please take them with you." It was all he could think to say, and he hoped it was enough. He went back to the campfire by his own cabin site and sat looking into the flames, praying for the safety of his parents and the others who had not been killed, praying for all who had survived, but mostly for his parents, and squatting there by the fire, also praying for daylight to come so he could begin looking for them. And in half an hour, a little more, his eyes closed, and sleep took him down until he was lying on his side by the fire, sleeping deeply with all the bad dreams that he'd known would come, sleeping with the twitches and jerks and whimpers at first, and then just sleeping. Sleep at last. Okay, so that was chapter 4. Obviously, we just got really into the book. That was a really telling chapter. So go ahead and make sure that you're answering those questions in full sentences. And I will see you tomorrow for the next video.